Hello, hello. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Tonight we are going to be we're going to be talking about using your history to heal. And I am so excited to do this. Actually, I have to share my screen before you can see what I'm doing. I just thought of that. So I'm going to share my screen and there we go. And let's see here. There we go. Using your history to heal, healing in the present by revisiting your past. So this is possibly a tricky topic because a lot of times we are dealing with things that are very difficult in our past. And so I want to start out by saying that none of the advice I'm going to give tonight is medical advice, nor should it replace the advice of your physician or your psychiatric help that you may or may not have. So I just want to say that going into it, that this is the advice I'm giving is not to replace any medical or psychiatric advice that you would get as a result of having a trauma history or anything like that. I do believe that it's a great starting point if you have been struggling with some things in your past. So a starting point, but not necessarily the whole picture. So, and then if you haven't had some major trauma in your past, I definitely think that this is going to be a great way to start down the road to healing some of your stuff. I think as empty nesters, we often are really hard on ourselves, and we have this idea that we might have regrets, like especially if our kids are not doing things that we want them to do or making choices that are good. And so I feel like a lot of times that comes from things in our history, and that we can overcome some of those feelings of inadequacy by revisiting our past a little bit and trying to heal some of those things that may or may not have happened in our past. So welcome, and let's get started. So tonight we're going to talk about 5 things: making the choice, genetics and the role they play, losing your victim status, emotionally speaking, and finding a new identity. I am really excited to talk about all the aspects of this topic because actually I really enjoyed building this content, because one thing about dealing with your past and your history is that it doesn't ever really end completely. If you're in a state of self-examination and you're trying to help yourself and move through things, it's good to revisit these topics from time to time. So I enjoyed revisiting these topics just for my own personal development. So let's start with each topic and give just a brief overview and then go from there. So first of all, making the choice. You can't really experience healing until you face who you are and you make the choice to work through your pain. So sometimes we're in a bit of denial. If you are like me and you have a personality like mine, you might be in denial that you even have any pain. That's where I kind of started in this journey about 3 years ago. I was kind of in denial that I even had any pain to deal with. So that could be a way that you need to be honest with yourself. Another way to be honest with yourself is being honest that maybe you are causing some of your own pain and you might need to face that. You might need to face that you haven't been perfect, and that's okay. There's a lot of different things that we face, according to our personalities and our backgrounds and what we have experienced or not experienced in our lives. So you have to make the choice. You have to come to a decision that you're going to make a change in order to really do yourself any good. So the second thing is genetics. And I know this might seem like an odd thing to throw in there, but I feel like a lot of people don't realize the part that genetics can play in our history and in how we deal with it. Genetics is one of those things that in the last 30 years, the knowledge about how genetics impacts our lives has really exploded. And because of that, there's a lot of information out there that maybe we didn't know when we were teenagers or even young adults that have come, that's come to light. And they do play a role in your healing because the choices that your parents and grandparents made are affecting you even at a cellular level. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. Next, losing the victim status. Now, I might step on a few toes in this department just by saying this, but victims don't really get better. They just react to life. And you are going to get better. And so you can't be a victim even if you were a victim. So when I say that, I'm not saying that you weren't a victim. If you have something in your past, if you were molested or raped or, robbed at gunpoint, or you had parents that were abusive or whatever it is that you have in your past, you absolutely were a victim. And I don't want to say that we are downplaying that at all. But there is a difference between having been a victim of a crime and continuing to stay a victim and stay in the victim mindset. So we're going to talk about that tonight a little bit. And I hope that you guys are really prepared for that topic a little bit and that you don't take offense to anything that is said. But I just want to reassure you that everything I talk about in this presentation, I'm talking about from a perspective of love and from helping you to heal. So I hope that really is apparent in the way I talk about things. Next, emotionally speaking, do you allow your emotions to rule you? Are you in tune with your emotions in a healthy way? These things impact your ability to heal. So you definitely want to think about your emotions and how you react to things, emotionally speaking. So that is one of the other ones we're gonna address tonight. And finally, finding your new identity. Often our pain is connected to the identity we had and we can no longer live out. So most of the people that are watching this are probably going to be empty nester moms because that is who I generally speak to in these sessions. And I really want to talk about finding a new identity because sometimes we lived the life that we really wanted to live and now we feel like it's all over. Other times we thought we were going to have the opportunity to live our best life or the life that we dreamed of, and things didn't turn out the way we thought they would. A good example for me was that I thought I would have 4 or 5 kids and then adopt 2 or 3 more. And it ended up that we were only able to have one biological child and we ended up adopting 2 other children. And it really changed the dynamic of our family, not in a negative way, but just it wasn't what I thought was going to happen. It wasn't what I expected. And it happened a lot earlier on in life. So, that was a big difference for me, something that I wasn't expecting. And that made the trajectory of our life really go down a different path. And that's fine. That is absolutely what we know God had in store for us. But it was different than what I had thought. When I had my first son, Ezra, I thought that I would have 3 or 4 more babies, but he was the only baby I ever got to experience. And I had to grieve that loss. And there was an identity that was mixed up with all of that. And so I have had some experience of finding a new identity. And I'd like to talk to you guys about that tonight because I think we probably are all in that season of discovering a new identity and it might be a little bit rough. So let's discuss that at the end of all of this. I think that's kind of what we're all working toward anyway as we work on developing our forgotten superpowers. So what is the definition of healing? I got this from the internet. This is the definition of healing from dictionary.com. The process of making or becoming sound or healthy again, and used in a sentence, the gift of healing. So healing is something that I think we probably use, we use a lot. We use a lot and probably improperly because I think sometimes we get the feeling that healing means that we are ignoring things or we are shoving things to the side. And that is not what I'm talking about when I talk about healing. It's the process of making or becoming sound or healthy again. If you guys have ever had horses, of course, I have a lot of horse things because I have horses. Um, if you have a horse that is lame, we say that he's not sound. His leg is not working properly. He might be able to walk. He might even be able to jog. If a wolf was after him, he could gallop. But there's something wrong with his gait. He's not quite going at the rate that he should. He's not moving the way he should. We have a horse that has a chronic hip problem that ends up bothering him about once every 3 or 4 months. It was because we were in a trailer accident and his hips go out on him. And when that happens, he looks like he's fine to the untrained eye. He walks around, he even trots, sometimes he runs. But if you were to try to ride that horse, that's when you really see that something's going on, that he's not sound, that his hips are not working the way they ought to, because he'll do a little buck because he's like, ouch, that hurts when you're riding me. Please don't do that. And if you walk right behind him, directly behind him, you can see that his legs kind of cross over each other in the back. And that's not the way a horse is supposed to walk. They're supposed to be two straight lines in their path. And so he's not sound when he's doing that. That means that even though it's very difficult to see it, he actually needs to have some healing massage therapy happen. And when we heal, um, that means that we are not having the pain that we had. We may have gone through the grief. We've faced the thing that we needed to face, and we're behaving in a healthy way. That means our relationships are good, and we're operating on all cylinders, so to speak. So healing is a very important thing to understand as we're going into this. So the first thing about healing is that we need to stop reacting and make a choice. We need to be intentional about healing and recognize that it's a process. So it's not going to happen overnight. We need to stop reacting to circumstances and start being proactive. We need to back away from toxic relationships and situations that cause us to stay stuck. And we make a promise to ourselves to find our way to freedom and work like a dog until you get there. Our reactions really determine our brain architecture and therefore the health of our mind and body. And that is something that you definitely want to be aware of as you make the choice to heal. Everybody has to make a choice when they decide that they're going to move forward with their personal development, when they decide that they're going to make a change in their life, that they're going to stop living halfway, that they're going to stop living the way they've been living and start moving into a healthier way of being and living. So our reactions really do determine our brain architecture. They create little pathways up there that are actually very powerful. We talked about that in the last session, and I will continue to talk about that. And so the health of our mind and body has a lot to do with our choices and the way that we react to things. So when we're becoming aware, the best way to start changing the way you react is to become aware of your reactions. So keep a journal of your reactions to the things that you know are going to trigger you by making a quick note in your phone around the time that you've had the reaction, and then reflecting on those reactions at the end of the day and then writing them in an actual journal or on your iPad or something where you have the physical act of writing. I know some people do like to type, but I will say this: there's a lot more healing and change that happens in your body from a psychological and neuroscience perspective when you actually use a pen and paper or a pen on an iPad. I have an iPad that I can actually write in, and that is super helpful for me because I tend to be relatively disorganized in the way that I deal with things, and I don't stay like I lose paperwork. So the way that I deal with that is if I have paperwork I need to keep, I store images of that paperwork in a secure location digitally so that I always have them and I can refer to them. And as it pertains to journaling, I actually journal in my iPad on with an app called Good Notes. So I have an iPencil and I actually journal that way. And that is really helpful. I have over 150 notebooks in my iPad that I can refer to and even do a search on whenever I need it. And that is super helpful because I am the kind of person that has a hard time finding things later or keeping track of things when they're on paper. So I always want to digitize everything, and it's been amazing. It's been life changing. So as you become more aware of your triggers, start to analyze why they are triggers in the first place. Because what triggers you is not going to trigger the next person. And then you make a plan about how you're going to react the next time you're faced with that trigger and practice it if you can. Now, during the last session, we talked about switching on your brain and doing the app that Caroline Leaf created that helps you go through the 5 steps to really change a bad habit or a toxic thought. And and that is one of the best ways I know of to make a plan about how you're going to react to something. Now you can write down a plan in advance, but that switch app is really amazing to figure that out. And actually, it's not called the Switch app; it's called something else. And I want to say it correctly so that you know. It's called Neurocycle. It's called Neurocycle. So anyway, that is the app that you would get to go through that 5 step process with a lot of help and hand holding. And I highly recommend it. It is a paid app. It's when I bought it, I think it was $80 a year, but it's totally worth it. So just so you know, that is a great way that you can make a plan about how you're going to react the next time you're faced with that trigger and be able to practice it throughout the day. Now, when I talk about triggers, I'm not necessarily talking about big trauma related triggers. So that's one thing you need to realize is that when you're becoming aware of your triggers, you're becoming aware of things that are possibly very small. Um, I'm trying to think of a good example. Um, hmm, in my own life, so I'm not thinking about somebody else's. Um, Oh, I know exactly. This is something that I've really been working on. So I figured out that I was really triggered by anything that tended to be boring because I just had this feeling based on my personality and some things that happened when I was growing up that anything that was boring or unpleasant might last forever and I would never get out of that situation. And so then I would always try to switch gears and do something fun and avoid that thing. Now, everybody has different reasons for avoiding boring things, but my thing was that I am very motivated by fun. And that can be a really destructive thing for your relationships and for following through and all that kind of stuff. So, about a year and a half ago, I discovered what I was doing and I started really working on it. And there were certain little triggers that I noticed that led back to that bigger trigger that rhymes of being worried that I was not going to get out of that bad situation and I would never have fun again. And I know that sounds a little extreme, but there are things that happen in our background, especially as we're growing up, that can very well create something that seems that big and that drastic. When we were adopting our kids, one of the things that we learned through my friend Christy Saul, who I interviewed in the summit. If you haven't gotten to watch my interview with her, it was excellent. She's amazing. She's been working with families, children and families that have come out of trauma for the last like 25 years. She's an incredible person and a friend. One thing that she taught us when we were adopting our kids 14 years ago was that the behaviors that they had were not necessarily based on rebellion. They were often based in fear. And you think, okay, what does that mean? Well, a really great example of that is if you would ask my son to turn off the television, he would go into a full blown tantrum. Now, for most people, you might think, okay, well, that's just a spoiled kid that doesn't want to turn off the TV, that has nothing to do with, trauma. Au contraire, it actually did. And we proved that by our reaction to this trigger that he had, which incidentally, his trigger could have been our trigger, but we didn't let that happen. And that's one of the reasons why he has been able to heal as much as he had. And I really give a lot of credit to Christy, Saul, and Brian Post, who introduced these concepts to us, because without them, we would not have known how to react to this stuff. So, instead of just telling him to turn off the TV, we would do a few things. We would give him a 5-minute warning, and then we would put a little timer up on the TV that actually had red so he could see as the red was running out. We made sure that it was running out right at the time when the show that he was watching would end, and so that he wasn't missing any of it. And then we would give him a timer and we'd tell him, okay, this is what's going to happen. Well, just doing that wasn't enough. So that was helpful. It reduced somewhat the reaction. I'm sorry. I ate pecans earlier today, and I feel like pecan skins are just like sprouting in my mouth. Anyway, um, we would tell him to turn off the television and he would have a tantrum. And so we gave him a warning, we set the timer, all that stuff. Then when it was time to turn off the TV, we would say to him, Gabe, or Dakota at the time, he went by Dakota, that was his first name. We want you to know that you are safe and that we are going to be able to watch TV again. This is not the last time you are going to get to watch TV. When you were really little, you had some really bad things happen and you were taken away very quickly from your house by people that needed to help you because your mommy wasn't taking care of you. And because of that, it makes you feel like it might be the last time you ever get to watch the show or watch television. But we want you to know that that's not the truth. And so we're going to walk away from the TV right now. We're going to turn off the TV together. And then we're going to go over in the corner. We're going to play a game for 10 minutes and do something else fun. And when we did that, it literally stopped the tantrums in their tracks. He was not being rebellious. He was triggered by that thought of turning off the TV because he really thought it would be the last time he'd ever get to watch TV. It was on a subconscious level. So we brought that to the surface so that he knew what was going on. And even at 6 years old, we could do that for him. We knew how to talk to him in such a way that it was at his level where he understood what we were saying. And then we would just go over and play Skip-Bo for 10 minutes. And that was fine. So we just transferred over to a new activity, and he knew that he would get to watch TV later. So that is a great example of how a trigger that doesn't look trauma related can be trauma related. And we can even carry those things into adulthood. It might look different. You're not going to lay on the ground and throw a tantrum, but you might actually even have a reaction to something like that. Your spouse comes in and says, hey, let's turn off the TV so that the kids can do such and such, so they can play Xbox or whatever. And you get triggered by that. And later you realize, wow, I had something related to turning off the TV as a kid that really makes me super irritated when that happens. And I don't need to be irritated about that. So I hope that's a good enough example where it gives you a little bit of an idea about what being aware and becoming aware means and how you can use it. So next we're going to talk about genetics and the role they play. Genetics is just an amazing topic. And I am not a neuroscientist, but I do a lot of research, especially using Caroline Leaf and her research. And so this hails back to some of the information from last session about switching on your brain. This is a quote from her. Choice is real and free will exists. You're able to stand outside of yourself, observe your own thinking, consult with God, and change the negative, toxic thought. I'm saying that first because genetics should never be an excuse for bad behavior. Your behavior is based on your choices, and you do have free will. Some behaviors will be harder than others to avoid. because of your background and because you have trauma or whatever. But that doesn't mean that you have an excuse for that bad behavior. So I want to start there and just put that caveat out there. So, in spite of the fact that we have free will, the reality is that genetics does impact DNA. Epigenetics is a science studying the impact of our choices on our DNA and therefore our children and our grandchildren. In the Bible, in Deuteronomy, God says the sins of the father will be visited on the third and fourth generations. And Christian neuroscientists believe this is not a statement based on punishment, but rather on genetics, which I think is absolutely fascinating. God knew that our toxic choices would literally change our DNA, affecting future generations. So he's speaking from a biological perspective, not like I'm going to put the hammer down on all your kids and grandkids because you're being a screw up. No, that's not what he meant. What he meant was the way our brains are formed, we actually have the ability to impact our future generations positively or negatively. And actually, he goes on later to say that the positive things that we do actually affect further generations than just the third and fourth. So I think that's kind of a cool thing that God made our brains where if we are making good choices, it actually impacts even further into the future than when we make bad choices. I think that's really cool. It's important to note that epigenetics doesn't change the DNA strand. Rather, it changes the way your body reads your DNA. So that's a little bit of a difference. I wanted to point that out. It doesn't change your DNA strands. And I got that information from the CDC website that talks about epigenetics, which I'm sure they know a lot more about epigenetics than I do. So anyway, I wanted just to put that out there. And at the end of the slideshow, I actually have a works cited page because a lot of the things I'm talking about are from more of a like a psychological or neuroscience kind of perspective. And I just wanted to give credit where credit is due to the different people that I actually cite in here. And you'll notice when you get to the end that it's missing one citation. It's because I decided later not to use the slide or the information. And so I took that I think number 6 citation out of there in case you notice later if you are a perfectionist. So our choices and our brains do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. That is from Romans 12:2. So the concept of epigenetics isn't a new one. God wouldn't have talked about these concepts if he didn't give an understanding to people like Paul in the Bible about the power of our minds to change the neural pathways in our brain, leading to lasting changes and real healing. So, all of these things that we talk about, we think we're so fancy schmancy and we've learned all these things brand new. There's really nothing new under the sun, just like Ecclesiastes says. There are so many things that are actually already in the Bible that neuroscientists just are now discovering that back up the truth in the Bible. It is kind of crazy. So, this is something that's been around for a really, really long time, but we're just now being able to really pinpoint and prove the different concepts and be able to see them on brain scans and things like that. So, epigenetics is a very ancient concept. It's just that we here in the 21st century often think that we're pretty smart stuff and we ignore a lot of the ancient things that happened back several thousand years ago. Ancient people had a lot of knowledge that we lost for a while in some instances and now have come back to, and in other instances we just feel like we're going to take credit for it. But the ancient people really had a lot of knowledge and we don't ever want to downplay that. So losing the victim mentality, this is the part that I'm feeling like, oh, you guys might get a little bit feisty with me. And I just want to again say that I say all of this out of love. I am not trying to make anyone feel less than or like they had a situation in which they shouldn't feel victimized, because there are so many things that happen to us where we are definitely victims of crime and abuse. And I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is ongoing victim mentalities that keep us stuck, that keep us from moving forward, that keep us from being our best selves that keep us from dreaming our purpose. So that's why I feel like this is a really important topic to talk about. So let's first define it. What is a victim mentality and where does it come from? A victim mentality is a state of mind where you feel like you have no control over your life and what happens to you. As a result, you're often in a state of hopelessness, not taking responsibility for things, and frequently being angry at those around you who you perceive have contributed, if not caused, your mental and emotional state. It often comes from a genuine background of trauma and real pain, though sometimes it can be cultural. So if you grow up in a home with parents who have truly been victimized and they have this victim mentality, they can just teach you how to be a victim. It happens a lot, actually. You don't have to have actually been a victim in order to have the victim mentality. And that actually is out there. So just be aware the victim mentality often does come from a background of real trauma. We don't want to ever undermine that or downplay it. So how do you know if you have this mentality? Here's some questions to ask yourself or some things to consider. Um, if you blame others for your situation, if you feel stuck like you can't get out of the rut you're in, if you have a life is against me mentality, if you're often defensive when you're given constructive criticism, if you feel powerless about your life and frequently have trouble coping with difficult situations that arise, all of these things can be red flags that you might have a victim mentality. It doesn't necessarily mean you absolutely do, but if you have, more than a few of these, you are probably dealing with a victim mentality, and you might want to consider really taking some time to self-examine so that you can abolish that victim mentality. So how can this mentality benefit somebody? That's kind of a weird question, but I think a lot of times we think, well, why would you want to think that way? That doesn't seem like that would be very much fun. So this is kind of the direction that people are coming from that have this mentality. You might get attention from others who feel sorry for you, at least for a time. So that's a pretty big driver for some people. They really enjoy the attention. They enjoy people feeling sorry for them, and it really kind of turns them on. They like it. And so that can be a big reason why people might have a victim mentality. It gives you an excuse to not take risks. So if you're always having a victim mentality, you might say when somebody has a new opportunity for you, even if you think it's a good idea, you might say, well, things don't ever work out for me, so I don't think I'm going to try that. It's a really big temptation when you have a victim mentality to not take risks that actually are healthy risks. Um, so that's something to consider. It also helps you place the blame on others and not yourself. It's not fun to look at our own hearts. It's not fun to look at who we are and what we're doing and say, I am thinking that I might be in the wrong here. It's not a fun thing to do. So it's a lot easier to blame other people. And that's why this victim mentality can be a really beneficial thing for people. It also gives you the satisfaction of feeling right all the time, like you're being wronged and therefore you're right. People with a victim mentality often do not look at themselves first when there's a problem. They're always looking at how other people have created the problem, at how other people have done wrong and have caused this horrible situation instead of looking at themselves. And that can be a real, it feels good to them maybe in the moment. I don't think that's ever really a good thing, though. I don't think that it ever really ends up making you feel good. But for some people, it might give a false sense of being right, which might work for them. So here's some 9 strategies. Here are 9 strategies for losing this mentality. Have some compassion for yourself. So being hard on yourself doesn't help you. If you have a victim mentality and you really want to change it, um, that's great. You don't have to sit around and be like, oh, I'm such a horrible person. Don't do that to yourself. So ask where the mentality came from and start to deal with it. You might need counseling. You might need to just really examine your family history. There might be a lot of different ways that you can look at the situation and figure out how you're going to deal with this victim mentality. Hang on one just a second. Okay. We kind of touched on these a little bit in the other slide, but make the decision to change. Stop blaming others even when they're truly contributing. So a lot of times the victim mentality can really flare up when you are actually in a real situation where other people are doing stuff that's wrong. But really, let's face it, that is everyday life. In every situation, you can probably find somebody else who's doing something wrong, and they may or may not recognize it. But if you can just focus on yourself and thinking about how you can be better, you would be shocked at how much the people around you will respond. And a lot of times, some of their bad behaviors start to disappear as well. So take the focus off you and start serving others regularly. Whenever you serve other people, it's really hard to feel sorry for yourself. And that is a huge part of getting over this victim mentality. Practice self development by reading books and consuming resources that help you deal with the issue. And there's plenty of resources out there to help you with that. Practice forgiveness toward those who've hurt you. It doesn't mean that you have to emotionally be vulnerable with those people or hang out with them. But what it does mean is that in your own heart, you've forgiven them. And that will help you more than anything you could possibly do, is to forgive the people around you. I mean, truly forgive them, even if they're continuing to do the thing that is hurting you. You might need to get away from them. I'm not saying you shouldn't get away from them, but you should forgive them. And when you forgive them, you actually are the one that has peace. They don't care anywhere. They wouldn't be victimizing you. Or maybe they don't even know that they're doing something wrong. And the fact that you forgive them is going to improve the relationship and maybe even help that thing to go away. Don't let self pity turn into anger and bitterness. When you feel it coming on, nip it in the bud. And don't take responsibility for, or do take responsibility for your actions and move on. Don't dwell on what other people are doing. Think about your own self. So here's some verses that might help with all of this. Sorry, my computer kind of moved a little bit. And now the screen is not right. There we go. Luke 6:42. I'm just going to read these. Or how can you say to your brother, brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when you yourself don't see the log in your own eye? Hypocrite. First, take that log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out in your brother's eye. And Ephesians 4:22 through 24. You took off your former way of life, the old self that is corrupted by deceitful desires. You are being renewed in the spirit of your minds. You put on the new self, the one created according to God's likeness in righteousness and purity of the truth. Proverbs 18:21. Life and death are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit. So, whatever you're speaking, you're going to eat that fruit. So if you are speaking a victim mentality, if you're speaking death and sadness and all that stuff on a regular basis, that's the fruit that you're going to eat. But if you're speaking things that are good and wholesome and truthful, and that doesn't necessarily, truthful doesn't always mean pleasant, but it also doesn't mean hopeless. If you are doing those things, then you're going to eat the fruit of being positive, and that is going to make a huge difference in your life. A joyful heart is good medicine, but a broken spirit dries up the bones. That is the truth. If you've ever been in a home with someone who does not have a joyful heart, it is pretty horrible. It is really tiring, exhausting, and their broken spirit really does feel like it just dries everything up around it. So, taking control of our emotions, we are getting closer to the end here. Every day, remind yourself of what counts and what doesn't. Remember that just because it's urgent and immediate, like in the news, that doesn't mean it's important. And ask yourself, how much will this matter in 100 years? These are all things that are going to help you tremendously in taking care of and taking control of your emotions. If you are not in control of your emotions, it's going to be very hard for you to move forward because all those triggers we were talking about, you're not going to be able to control the anger and resentment and anxiety and fear and all that stuff that comes up when those triggers come about. And until you get a handle on that, it's going to be very difficult to change. So, what is important when we're asking that first question? Relationship with others and God. Keeping this in mind will help you to keep perspective the things that truly matter. In Philippians 3:10, Paul says, "For my determined purpose is that I may progressively become more deeply and intimately acquainted with him, perceiving and recognizing and understanding the wonders of his person more strongly and more clearly." So that kind of sums it up. That is an amazing purpose. Now, we're talking about Paul here, and he is, of course, an amazing person. But that's a really great verse to keep us grounded. Start your day with quiet time getting to know God and tapping into his power. And that will do more for helping you control your emotions than just about anything else. So, here are 5 strategies to control your emotions. Number 1, identify your emotions and the impact they're having on you and others. Number 2, try to regulate your emotions, not eliminate them, because experiencing emotions is normal. Accept your emotion even while you are examining them. Journal. Keep a mood journal to help you find patterns and to deal with triggers and regret. Learn some deep breathing exercises. And when you have an intense emotion, breathe deeply before making a decision or taking action. That is such a simple way. I cannot express to you enough how much deep breathing has helped me. It has been amazing. So, finding your new identity. Take the time for self-development. Learn about who you are by being intentional with your time in this area. Be honest with yourself. What are your strengths and weaknesses? How are your relationships currently? Evaluate yourself and how you're doing in all those areas. Realize you're probably going to have gifts that have laid dormant for a while because you were in a season of serving while you were raising children. And it might take a minute for you to transition, and that's okay. And then start with one resource and focus on learning about yourself using that resource. I recommend either starting with the 8 intelligences or the Enneagram. If you already know your type, or even maybe your Myers Briggs letters, delve more deeply into one of those personality assessments to learn more about your natural reactions to things and your natural defaults when it comes to learning and experiencing life. That is going to help you so much because whenever you do that, you are able to get one step closer to who it is that you're supposed to be. So, strategies to work toward a new identity. First of all, make a clear set of goals that you've learned once you've learned more about who you are and where you want to be. Second, accept where you are and enjoy it. There are many good things about your life if you're just willing to see them. Override your fear with faith that you will get to a better place, an identity that is filled with a fullness of purpose. And once you've set your goals and are working towards your new identity, maintain unwavering faith and put forth extraordinary effort. Don't give up on stuff. Once you're there and you're like, okay, I'm working toward my new identity, I know what it is, I know what the goals are. Don't give up on it. It might take a few years for you to really completely, fully come to fruition. That's okay. Be sure that you have unwavering faith that God will help you to become the person that you're supposed to be, and you put forth extraordinary effort. If you're spending maybe 30 minutes a day on it, here and there, I'm going to spend some time on it. Of course, you're not going to realize your new identity very quickly. You've got to make a decision to work hard. So I hope you've enjoyed this. And now we've gotten to the fun part, which is the homework. We're getting close to 45 minutes, and I like to keep these between 45 minutes and an hour. So I have a PDF in the lesson section for you to download. And there is also a video link in the lesson section. Both of those things are your assignment for next week. I think you'll really benefit from those things. And thank you so much for being with me. Does anybody have any questions? I'm just going to look in the chat really quick and see if there's any questions. Nope, doesn't look like there are. I know I gave a lot of information tonight, so I hope that that has been helpful for you. Um, anyway, that's it. I'm going to go to my works cited page really quick so you can see the different things I used. And, if you want to, you can take a screenshot so that you have that stuff and you can benefit from it yourself. So, anyway, I have appreciated being with you tonight. I always do. You guys are awesome. And I will talk to you next week. Bye.